everybody. People are slowly coming in. Gordon, great to see you. Thank you very much indeed, as ever, for bringing your expertise to this extraordinary topic. Great to see you, everybody. Thank you for coming in. Jenny, Adrian, Mark, Marta, great to see you all. As I say, every time, Chrissy, good to see you too. Well, not see you, but you know what I mean. As I say, every time we do these, I so wish we could all be, you know, in a lovely 5-star hotel together somewhere, having just had a nice coffee. But never mind, we are not, and we are making the best of the technology that luckily we are blessed with. So we have 160 people signed up today, as you know. People come and go. The session is being recorded, so I will get that out to you tomorrow, and it'll go out to the members next week. So here we are again, Gordon, discussing Brexit, and I think it's been interesting over the months. You know, the last few of these, we've kind of, you know, you've kind of always started off by saying, well, it's not really that different to the last time we spoke. This time it is significantly different to the last time we spoke, thank goodness. But my goodness, that went to the wire, didn't it?
It was incredible. And really, until we had the deal, that last minute deal, it wasn't clear at all whether there would be a deal. I mean, it was still really possible that there would be a no-deal Brexit. So we got there. We have a free trade agreement called the EU-UK Trade and Cooperation Agreement,
yep.
TCA as it's being called, at least in the UK. And the big thing is it avoids tariffs, it avoids quotas. The agreement has actually been described by some opponents as thin, but equally it does deal with a lot of big issues, and it's over 1,000 pages of dense legal text plus guidance notes. So perhaps describing it as thin is inappropriate. That's quite fat.
What was so fascinating to me, because this came out on Christmas Eve, didn't it? And on Christmas Day, I'm looking at my news feeds, and I was like, all those poor journalists who are having to try and read this 1,000-page document over Christmas, and trying to get some facts out there as quickly as they could. You know, that ruined quite a lot of press Christmases, I would say. But after the year we've had, they deserve it. So go on.
No, I was just going to say the big thing, just sort of summing up where we've got to, is that the EU and the UK have actually separated on reasonably amicable terms, and you know that's so important, because the economic consequences of no deal were really looking pretty serious from all sides. So yeah, it just the importance of getting any deal was really pretty critical.
And it was, I mean, it was very interesting. I've been talking about this with board members and with TAD, and, you know, it came down to, you know, people were really down to two sides. I was convinced we were crashing out with no deal. I think you and I had several conversations. I had several conversations like with Alistair and other board members that, you know, come on, get it together, because there really wasn't the positivity coming out of those negotiations that we were expecting. So that being said, first of all, we're going to talk about what's covered by the Trade and Cooperation Agreement, but who won the negotiations, if such a thing could be said?
Both sides left feeling reasonably satisfied with the deal. You know, a great test of that is the fishing leaders from the EU and on the UK side. Both are really dissatisfied and feel let down by their governments. Therefore, that suggests that actually a reasonable compromise was reached somewhere in the middle. The EU, although they were never public on this, they had three broad objectives that had to be met. Firstly, that there shouldn't be a serious economic hit as a result of Britain leaving, which no deal would have caused. So, you know, tick that box. There may be a bit of a hit, but that will be mainly at the UK end. Secondly, they wanted to make sure that Britain would be leaving with, you could say, worse trading access than they had with the status quo as being part of the EU. There was no way the EU would be satisfied if Britain left and actually they were getting all the advantages of being part of a trading bloc, but actually being outside it and getting other advantages as well. And that links into the third real objective of the EU. And this, particularly going back a few years, was a real concern at one time that there might be a bit of a chain reaction. You know, the UK leaves, negotiates a good deal from a UK perspective, and other countries are thinking, well, maybe we could do the same. And you know, it's not so long ago that particularly opposition leaders in a number of EU states, and thinking here Marie Le Pen, for example, in France, but there were others too saying, well, we think we should have a referendum on EU membership. And they've gone really pretty quiet on that over the last year or so, as the UK has gone through so much pain through this long negotiating period. So in that sense, I think the EU hit its three objectives, but equally from a UK point of view, I mean, firstly, they needed a free trade agreement, and that's been achieved, thin or not. And on the other hand, you know, you'll recall the Brexit slogan about taking back control. Well, the UK has taken back control of immigration. They've taken back control to a large extent of regulations in areas like, you know, environmental, not having the European Court of Justice, having jurisdiction in the UK. But that's probably oversimplifying it, because there are lots of exceptions and lots of just still hurdles in there. For example, the European Court of Justice still has jurisdiction over Northern Ireland, because Northern Ireland continues to be bound by the single market and the customs union. So it's not as simple as saying the Court of Justice no longer has jurisdiction in the UK. It does in part of the UK. And even in, you know, all the areas where the UK is free to regulate now, we do have these level playing field provisions, which means that if the EU feels it's being undercut by the UK, then they can take steps to have arbitration on what's changed, and if necessary, impose tariffs. So, but overall, I think the UK would be pretty happy with the deal that's been achieved. And again, this is in the context that, you know, as recently as 3 weeks ago, there was a real danger of no deal. So both sides pretty happy. I mean, one thing that occurs to me, you know, I don't know if you've done any these classic one-day courses on how to negotiate a deal. You know, it used to be a standard part of management training, and you would have case studies. And it might be, you know, it could be the Arab-Israeli conflict and peace deal in the Middle East. But I just wonder if this is going to be a case study. And to some extent, it's almost how not to negotiate, because it went to the very last minute, and the disruption that caused for businesses in the EU and in the UK is significant. But they did get a deal done. So maybe at the end of the day, they achieved something very important. But I don't think it would be a classic case study on how to negotiate a business deal.
I think there's going to be an awful lot of MBA final essays on that over the coming years. But I do find it fascinating that, I mean, you followed this politically all the way through, and there was political will and there was no political will, and there was more and there was posturing, and, you know, all of those things that you say, you know, are not what you should do when negotiating. When it came down to the final sort of hurdles and sticking points, was there just a rapprochement? Because people had said some very strong things up until that point.
You know, I think both sides, and this is where it's different from a business deal, it's politics. And so both sides also had to appeal to their own electorates. And therefore they had to make these harsh statements that made it sound as if they were being tough. At least that's how they would justify the way things went. You have to wonder, given the kind of deal that was made and the fact it's been generally accepted as reasonable by all parties, could that not have been done 6 months ago? Wasn't it already clear in the middle of last year that this is the kind of what they call the landing area, the area where we're likely to do a deal? And I'd be surprised if it wasn't pretty clear what that landing area was months earlier. But, so politics maybe got in the way of just straightforward negotiations, I think.
Very interesting comments just come through to the Q&A box. Oh, and by the way, if you have a question or a comment, please put them in the Q&A box or put them in the chat. We'll come to them as it seems logical, but very interesting on that political point. The UK can still sink the deal at any time after the first year. This was done to placate the DUP and the ERG. So there's still the possibility of politics rearing its ugly head again.
Yeah, and so the suggestion being that it could fall apart after a year.
Well, that we could walk away from it, I think, is the point. But let's move away from the political spectrum and move more into the specifics of, we've talked a lot about what was going to happen when Brexit happened according to our industry, how is it going to impact on mobility generally, how's it going to impact on the EuRA providers all over the world. So where would you like to start with that?
Yeah, I think we have to start with the two big areas that everyone's had concerns about, or that would really impact directly on relocation services. One is immigration, and the other is personal data and how we would deal with that after Brexit. Now, in terms of immigration, I mean, it has to be said this is the positive for our industry, because immigration firms will be there will be more work, because every time somebody moves between the UK and the EU, and I don't know what the figures are, but huge volumes clearly. In future, visas, work permits, whatever will be required. So so happy days if you're an immigration firm. We already knew from the withdrawal agreement that existing rights would be preserved, and that's clear cut. If you were already a UK citizen working in the EU, or an EU citizen working in the UK with your family, whatever the situation, provided you followed the country's registration requirements, then you're fine. Your rights are preserved. And in the UK, we call it pre-settled status. And if you've been around for 5 years in the UK, settled status. So that's unchanged and clear cut. But of course, going forward, EU citizens will have no special immigration rights at all in the UK. It will be a case of applying under our new points-based system, just as a citizen of India, China, or the United States would apply. So it becomes a lot harder to enter the UK for work purposes. And of course, the same is true. UK citizens now wanting to work in France, Germany, Italy will have to comply with the individual requirements of that country. The only exception to that is what's called the common travel area, and that is just the UK and Ireland. And that was a treaty that was before the EU came into being, and that will continue to exist. So it does mean, for example, an Irish citizen is able to live and work in the UK. That's unchanged. I mean, one of the interesting things for somebody running a relocation business, and I think back to my days when we had offices in the UK, and we had several offices in mainland Europe. And it didn't really matter to me if I was going over to spend some time in our Paris office. I didn't really need to think of, oh, is this for a business meeting or a conference, or and can I spend a few days getting on with my work while I'm in the Paris office? Whereas now, of course, it has to be compliant with, in this case, French immigration law. So if I'm planning to go over there and be working in a routine way, then it's highly likely that I will need to apply for a visa. So just having to think about these things is, is new to us. And when I was doing an article for the most recent European, I gave the example of musicians, which some countries will waive any visa requirement for cultural activities, but other countries don't. It's specific to each country. So I think in France and Germany, there's a cultural activity exemption, but if I'm performing at La Scala in Milan, I will need a visa. And if I'm part of a symphony orchestra of 70 of us, that's 70 visas, and probably national insurance requirements, because the old A1 exemption where I could say, oh, I was paying national insurance in the UK, therefore I don't need to pay for it as well in Italy. These disappear now. And so there will be some organizations where the kinds of things that they are used to doing with no cost for immigration or national insurance purposes now become very much more expensive. But it will be down to the individual country. It's not as if there is an EU immigration law. We will have to, if I'm going to France, if I'm going to Germany, I will need to check the specific visa requirements in that country. The other thing I mentioned in that article was football clubs, and that a nice example is that the Manchester United manager Ole Gunnar Solskjaer would now be unable to get a job in the UK. At the time he joined Manchester United, he was manager of a Norwegian team, and he wouldn't have passed the points-based requirement for a football manager coming into the UK, because the Norwegian league is regarded as a minor league, and so it goes on, bringing in individual footballers, and footballers going from the UK to the European Union. Again, it will depend on that country's individual rules relating to bringing in sports people. So we'll see in the UK slightly fewer EU footballers, except at the very top, of their game, internationalists, for example, and we might see relatively more South Americans and Asian footballers. That remains to be seen, but it just becomes tougher now to do these sort of things that football clubs didn't need to think about at all, or orchestras didn't need to think about in the past. So
yeah, that's fascinating, because again, I mean, we've had a conversation about whether or not we, as the team delivering a conference, would be on requirements for a business visa in Spain, as opposed to if we last year, in Germany. It raises these questions, and I mean, obviously, and Chrissy Twigg, you've put a good question in the chat box. What's the maximum time that you can work in Europe without a visa? Again, the same sort of conversation that I'm having about, can we go and deliver a conference for 2 weeks without a work visa? And does it apply to any and all trips? But I think you're going to come to that.
Yeah, well, I mean, really just to hit that one on the head right away, because in some ways, if you're going to work, well, firstly, it will come down to the individual country's rules. But if you're going to work, then you will require a visa. It doesn't matter in theory whether it's 1 day or 2 weeks. Now, in practice, if you're going for 1 day, it's probably just going for a meeting. I mean, for EuRA, you're in the fortunate position being able to phone up a Spanish member of EuRA and just ask the question and get a very practical answer to that. But if you don't happen to have the privilege of knowing member firms around Europe, if you're not in the relocation business, then yeah, you're going to have to pay for that advice. So yeah.
So I had a really interesting question yesterday from Tony Van Hanen. Thank you, Tony, from Smart Move, who asked this question. And Gordon and I had a chat about it. And then I asked Fiona Mugano if she had any insights as an immigration specialist. So Fiona, I'm going to unmute your mic if that's okay. The question was, will a British national living in one EU country, not the UK, but commuting weekly, say Monday to Friday, to work in another EU country, say for example, Luxembourg to Belgium, need a residence permit, work permit, or both? If yes, for which country, or both? So Gordon and I decided we were not specialists. So Fiona, I'm going to just unmute your mic if that's okay. Do you want to give us an answer? I see. This is where the technicalities of Zoom does, you know, sometimes it just doesn't work. Listen, I will read out what Fiona said, and just to also codicil this by saying, we are running a specific immigration session for, oh, hi, Fiona, how are you?
Fine, how are you?
Very good, lovely to hear you. How are you doing?
I'm very good, I'm very good. Thank you. And thank you very much for this wonderful case study, because it really is a case study. I think we could put it to the immigration group at one time. So I did come back with, I mean, there are obviously lots of questions that you'd have to ask a client, like, is the person single? As that could have implications. I mean, they might be married to an EU national, for example. So the quickest route is then to file for a permit as spouse of an EU national. And it also would have, in my opinion, and I'm sure Gordon can probably expand on that, it could have implications on the income tax and determining where is his home. Is his home in his home country? Where are the family? Mm-hmm. Then there would be questions like, where is the employer based? Is that in an EU country where he lives or works, or is that in the UK? If he lives in the EU country A and is only there for the weekends and maybe some holidays, in my opinion, he would need to determine whether he overstays the 90 days during a 180-day period in that country. And if so, then at least a residence permit would be required there. For the EU country in which he is working Monday to Friday, he obviously overstays the 90 days. Therefore, he will require a work permit and a residence permit, as it's probably going to be a combined one, as if he has been working in that country and living in the other one prior to the 31st of December, well, in most cases, he's going to be able to jump on to the withdrawal agreement. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. And it just, I mean, what it does so perfectly is illustrate the minutiae and the complexities of how this is going to play out. And that's why, as I say, thank you, Fiona, you're going to take part in a specific Brexit immigration seminar. I think it's the 21st of January.
Correct.
So the details of that are going out very shortly. Thank you so much, Fiona. Lovely to hear you.
Thank you.
See you later. Bye.
I'm so glad that we had Fiona for that question.
Like you say, I mean, we're very privileged in this industry that we can just reach out and ask people because they'll be able to give us the answers. But I mean, from the point of view of that level of minutiae, there is going to be a great deal of uncertainty, and corporations are going to find themselves in situations where they may be non-compliant through no fault of their own. So, you know, nevermore has mobility been a big deal. Can we move on to, oh, sorry, I'm just going to bring in this question from Adrian Leach just to really raise Tad's blood pressure. I'm looking forward to Gordon's insights onto how VAT is covered by this trade agreement. Do you want to come on to that later?
Yeah, maybe about 30 minutes after we finish.
Yeah, it's a great question. Thank you, Adrian. Also,
sorry, Dom.
No, go ahead.
I was just going to say, there has been quite a lot of stuff on VAT and how that's changed on goods. People, for example, in the UK finding it difficult to buy from some specialist suppliers, maybe in Sweden, Denmark, because these specialist suppliers now require to register for VAT in the UK. Now, my understanding is that's not directly to do with Brexit. It's just the UK now having taken the opportunity to change their VAT regulations and not give suppliers in EU countries any different status from non-EU suppliers. Now, in terms of how it affects services, I'm not aware of any change yet, but that's something I will look out for. So
I think you'll be getting a telephone call from Ted about that anyway, because the VAT situation with our conference is incredibly complex as it stands.
Yeah.
So,
we all love VAT, but I mean, what it does mean is that the UK can now depart from EU rules on VAT. VAT was the one tax that was EU controlled, and each country had to operate within certain fixed parameters in terms of rates and how it was structured. So in theory, the UK could depart significantly from that. But in terms of relocation businesses, I'm not aware of a change yet, but yeah, we'll keep an eye out for that.
Rob Fletcher's just put into the Q&A, our accountant has confirmed no changes based on the delivery of quote services.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Great.
and Rob, another great question from you, which I'll come to at the end, because it ties in neatly. So Gordon, another thing that we've talked an enormous amount about over the years is data and data security. What's happening?
Yeah, so the big issue we had was whether the UK would receive what's called an adequacy decision. So that means that EU data could be moved to the UK without any formality. It was just as if the UK was still in the European Union. Now, effectively, the UK has given an adequacy decision the other way, so that there's no problem moving data from the UK to the European Union. The European Union is still being cagey on this one. It's not covered by the agreement, other than to say that for an initial 6 months period, while the situation is reviewed by the European Union, then European data can be moved to the UK. So it's almost like another transition period has been agreed specifically for data. Obviously, the UK fully expects to get that adequacy decision, but at the moment, that's just a short-term solution we have. So again, it's another area we'll be keeping a close eye on, as and when a decision is either made in favor of the UK or at worst against the UK, and then we can talk about the consequences of that further down the trail. But at the moment, no concerns, no immediate concerns about that. I think the other area around data, which I've highlighted and companies now need to think about, is if you have your office in the UK and you have no EU offices now, whether you're a UK business or you might be an American business with just a UK office for Europe, is whether you need to appoint a European representative. Now, for smaller businesses, and I'm thinking here of typical DSPs, it's highly unlikely that will be required. And the reason for that is around the wording. It doesn't apply if your processing is only occasional and of low risk. But if you're a larger company and you're handling more sensitive data and you're really involved in supplying services to EU citizens on a regular basis, then you may have to appoint a representative in the EU, whether that's a law firm or whether it's an arrangement you have with a partner firm in the EU. But it's something to be aware of, and to get the kind of exact details and examples so you can decide if it applies to you. The ICO website, that's the Information Commissioner's Office, is the website to look at. And there's a section there on, do I need a European representative? That's ico.org.uk.
Yeah, and there's a lot of really good data on that. I mean, this is something we're going to have to talk about all year because we're still in flux about the US Privacy Shield as well. So
yeah, I mean, in terms of the Privacy Shield, really no progress has been made in terms of any attempts to replace it. There was talk of negotiations between the EU and the US to see if they could come up with something. That seems to have gone dead, and I guess nothing will happen there until the new president's in place, and even then, I think it could take some time. So for relocation management companies in particular, who are moving data from the EU to the US, they really now need to put in place what are called the standard contract clauses. They need to update their agreements with their suppliers and partners in the US. So yeah, that's a hassle, and that's the kind of hassle we want to avoid for European data moving to the UK.
A couple of interesting things through the Q&A. Baz, thank you very much. Baz Hooperman. Existing rights are preserved. So, for example, a UK national, this is going back to what we were talking about before, who already was an employee or self-employed in the EU country can normally continue to live work in that country. What about a UK company that started a service provision in an EU country before the 31st of December, but now needs to continue or finish the same service? Is my understanding correct that these services cannot be continued without a local work or residence permit? Again, I think that's a bit specialist for us, but certainly join in with the immigration session. But Gordon, what's your initial thought?
Yeah, it's really to say it will come down to the individual country that we're talking about here, because it will be subject to their immigration rules. So I think, yeah, these kind of questions, it will be great to capture them, and we can then actually build that immigration session around very specific questions like that. But yeah, unfortunately, with most of these questions on immigration, we really have to pick them up, take them away, think about them, and often, as Fiona had to do there, you're coming back with some questions to the questioner because you need to know more about the status of the company, the country involved, etc. So, so sorry to be ducking immigration questions, but I think it is more beneficial if we carry them forward to the next session.
But like you raised, Baz, the specifics are so minute that this is where expert advice is absolutely essential. So we've talked a lot about the immigration part, the data transfer, how the ECJ is going to work. For individuals now, what are we talking about the impact on individuals being primarily?
Yeah, so this has now become clearer. And again, I'm probably repeating some things that we've talked about in previous sessions, but it is clearer. For example, personal banking is one area of hassle. So if you have expats, UK expats in the EU, they're probably finding that their banks are saying, if they have still a UK bank, then they may find their accounts being closed and their credit cards are being discontinued, and they're having to make new banking arrangements. And that's all to do with the ending of passporting, which allowed financial institutions to operate across all EU countries. That has now ended for UK banks. They have, or they're looking for something that's called equivalence as a technical term, and that's where the EU say, well, for that particular type of service, that type of activity, we're satisfied that you are subject to the same rules and standards as the EU, therefore we'll let you do that. But that's not in this agreement. It's really being carried forward, a bit like the data issue as well. So it means that in the meantime, banks which don't have licenses in every individual state of the EU are having to withdraw facilities from British customers. So that will have an effect, obviously, on relocation and how you set up banking arrangements for assignees. The general, if we move away from the working side, I mean, for actual visits, it's you can have visa-free access for 90 days, up to 90 days in any 180-day period. So that's agreed. Though from 2022, so sometime next year, I think there's no date for this yet, but there will then be the need for a visa waiver certificate. It's called the European Travel Information and Authorization System. We're used to it for the United States with the ESTAs. The European Union will be introducing its equivalent. So there'll be a little bit of cost and paperwork for going to a European Union country on holiday, but it lasts for 3 years. So that's not a big deal. The agreement does, sorry?
Is that reciprocal?
Yeah, the UK is talking about introducing a system as well, but that again, further down the road, there's nothing yet. But yeah, the 90 and 180 days is reciprocal, yeah. There is a fair bit in the agreement about reciprocal healthcare. So there has been an attempt to allow UK citizens to use healthcare facilities in the EU and vice versa. All the details are still to be sorted out on that, and obviously we'd be advising people to take out travel insurance anyway, but there has been at least an attempt to sort that one out.
And that in itself is quite interesting, because again, conversations that we had at the time, that was quite a political football here about access to the NHS. And
that's right, yeah, it was. So progress on that. Mobile roaming charges, there's nothing in the agreement about that, which means that the UK citizens will now be subject to roaming charges if they were imposed. Now, what the mobile companies are saying is they have no plans to reintroduce mobile roaming charges. So for the moment, that's fine, but UK citizens are no longer protected by EU law, which says you cannot impose roaming charges. So we'll see how that one rolls out. Driving in the EU for UK citizens, you'll now need what's called a green card to show that you have insurance. So you have to obtain that from your UK insurance company before heading off to drive in France or Germany. And it's a little bit vague as to whether an international driving permit will also be needed. There's some feedback that's suggesting that some countries in the EU will require an international driving license and others won't. So that one's a bit vague, but obviously if you are going to a specific country, you would be checking in advance whether a license was needed. Again, it's a small payment for that, but just another bit of paperwork that you would need in advance. Other things, Britain tried hard to get mutual recognition of professional qualifications. They failed in that, and that is really, again, another area that's being carried forward, and it may come down to country reciprocal arrangements. So if I'm a UK physio, it might be there's a deal where my qualification in the UK is accepted in Germany specifically, or in France. But at the moment, there's no big overarching deal, which Britain was pushing for, but had to drop in the end. And the last one, last but not least, pets. So Britain is no longer a part of the pet passport scheme. There is an arrangement now that involves you getting a certificate from your vet, and costs almost £100 now, and it lasts for one visit and for 4 months. Yeah, so if you're making regular trips with Fido to France, then yeah, you could. It is quite expensive. So as a dog owner, that's a bit of a disappointment, but there it is. It's hardly the most important aspect of Brexit.
It's better than nothing, but it's just another thing. Chrissy Twigg, very interesting question. Thank you. Any impact on arrangements with banks on incoming assignees to the UK? Will it be more difficult to open a UK account?
No, coming to the UK, in fact, we are being actually very welcoming to financial institutions of whatever, so foreign banks, EU banks will be able to operate as normal in the UK. The problem is just the other way around. But if it's a more general question about UK banks, and if you're an EU citizen opening an account with a UK bank, I've not heard of anything that would cause additional problems. I mean, it's a big enough hassle already. I can't imagine it's going to get harder to open a bank account in the UK. You're now signing your life away and producing a massive documentation. So that's something, again, we'll look out for, but I've not heard of any specific banking problems for EU citizens.
So what does this mean for the corporates, the corporate clients of EuRA members?
Yeah, I think we can split this into those in the manufacturing sector and those in the service sector. So, if you're in the car industry, if you're in the food and drink sector, it's good news because there are no tariffs. There's some extra paperwork, the customs checks, rules of origin compliance, that kind of thing. But it's, the agreement is really all about making it as straightforward as possible, subject to the paperwork requirements for goods to move between the UK and the EU. So good news for car manufacturers, for example. But completely different for service companies because the agreement doesn't deal with services at all. And so, for example, in the financial sector, which is huge in the UK, we've already mentioned the loss of passporting rights and reliance on new negotiations now around this concept of equivalence. One thing about equivalence is even if it's granted for your bank's activities in the EU, it can be withdrawn by the EU on 30 days notice. So it's a far weaker right. And, would you be building your business around something that was so uncertain? So there are some real hurdles for UK banks now operating in the EU. I mean, from an EU perspective, I guess they see this as an opportunity to develop the financial sector further in European cities. I'm just checking, the latest estimate is that probably only around 7,500 jobs financial sector jobs have moved out of London to the European Union. So it's relatively small. And one of the negatives for the EU is that they don't have an equivalent of London. In some ways, and we've seen the competition that goes on between Amsterdam, Frankfurt, Paris, Luxembourg. They're all competing to be the center of financial activity in whatever sector they're in. And that sort of spreading of the financial centers means that they don't have that kind of inbuilt infrastructure and range of expertise the City of London does have. So for the moment, the feeling is that while the City of London would have preferred that Brexit didn't happen, the damage to it looks like being relatively small, relatively contained. Now, whether over the next few years there will then be more of a drift and Paris or Amsterdam really becomes a center of, to compete with London remains to be seen. But so there has been some loss of jobs, some loss of business, but really not great in the big scheme of things.
So thank you. That's very interesting because that was one of the things that was a real hot topic, wasn't it? When all the speculation was going on, it was like, will we lose? From that point of view, who will be the winners? So Rob Fletcher put a question in early on, which is a very interesting one. How much will the European Union miss the net contribution of the UK to the EU's budget?
Yeah, I mean, it means that all the other net contributing countries in the EU are having to contribute more. So that is significant. I mean, the other thing around this is the way that the EU has shrunk as a power, you know, in population terms and GDP terms. So, you know, there is a sense of loss from an EU perspective as well, not just, you know, in cultural terms, but in hard financial terms. It is a smaller trading bloc. It's still an enormous trading bloc, but it's lost a big chunk. It's lost 60 million people. It's lost a big chunk of GDP when you're comparing it as a bloc against China or against the United States. So there's no way the European Union would see this as anything other than a negative, albeit, again, life goes on. And it was probably more important, just coming back to the point we talked about earlier, the worst thing that could have happened from an EU perspective would have been the knock-on effect, the domino effect, if the Netherlands or if France had started going down the same path or even considering holding a referendum. You know, the negativity that would have caused would have been enormous. But really, as far as I'm aware, there's no sign of that other than in very much fringe groups rather than mainstream political parties.
Politics is a very fast-moving environment, and you know, with not just the geopolitical issues surrounding Brexit, but obviously at the moment with the COVID pandemic. You know, you and I have talked about this, and you brought up some wider issues just to have a quick discussion about. At the moment, given, like you say, the stability of political structures within the EU, do you see that any other EU countries likely to follow the UK in pushing for?
No, I don't think so. I mean, the EU's difficulties at the moment are tending to be with countries like Hungary and Poland, where you know, it's more about rule of law issues and values as the EU would see it. But again, I don't think that's been translated into political parties saying, "Oh well, in that case, we're going to hold a referendum about leaving the EU." So I think these are different kinds of difficulties, and the EU certainly has plenty of difficulties with its neighbours. You know, and Russia on one hand, Turkey, Middle East issues. So, but I don't think that's really on their agenda now. That we have to make sure that nobody else follows the UK. I think that issue for the moment has died down.
And I'm not meaning to be the prophet of doom, but the last time I was in Athens was I think 2012, after the financial crash, and obviously Greece had been extremely badly affected by that. And I think at that point, Yanis Varoufakis was in power, and there was quite a big push for Brexit as it was being seen then. So, you know, when, you know, as you know, fortunes change, then so political wills also shift. So we'll be keeping an eye on all of that. Yeah. But will the EU now regard the UK as a friend or as a competitor?
Yeah, in some ways it will be a friend. You know, when we look at things like security cooperation and sharing of, you know, fingerprint data and terrorist information, all of that, where the UK is fairly advanced in the field, and you know, the cooperation will continue to be very strong. There are one or two specific areas around security where there may be additional kind of administrative hurdles now, but equally a lot has been agreed to continue just as we are. So, I mean, that's a huge thing. You know, you're talking about security cooperation. I would imagine that keeps people being pretty friendly, you know, even although they may be annoyed about specifics. The kinds of areas that could cause problems would be, I think, firstly, the financial services sector, as we've said, is far from clear. And if the UK feels it's really being excluded from Europe in terms of ability to do business, then, you know, there's the potential for friction there. If the UK starts to deregulate in some areas with a view to, you know, they used to talk about Singapore on Thames, you know, really getting rid of red tape and getting rid of a lot of employee protections and environmental protections and getting costs down. Now, I don't think for a moment that's going to happen, but that was a huge fear from the EU. Now, if a future UK government started to go down that route, then yeah, I guess there is the potential for being seen as a very unfriendly competitor on the doorstep, rather than this kind of amicable arrangement that we appear to have at the moment. So, but for the moment, yeah, I think it's probably worked out as well as it could have.
I mean, again, just from that sort of political point of view, a lot of the kind of pro-Brexit arguments, during the referendum and following were about things like, well, we can drop our corporation tax and encourage inward investment. I'm assuming that's been locked out by the deal, by the TCA.
Interestingly, it's not so much been locked out. No, I mean, the UK, in a sense, won the argument that it could make changes to its regulations. But there is then arbitration on whether that is unfair competition, whether they're using that change of regulation to unfairly compete with European Union companies. So Britain can do what it likes, and that's what Boris Johnson is able to say, yeah, we're in total control now. But against that, if they do certain actions, it could trigger a ruling which could end up with the EU being allowed to impose tariffs, for example. So, so there's a mechanism there that it allows both parties to have kind of walked away from the agreement saying they achieved what they wanted to achieve.
Going back to the thing we were just talking about in terms of other EU states leaving, Robert Fletcher asks an interesting question, which is, given that there is now an actual template for how that worked for the UK, would it be simpler if somebody did decide to renew? And would it be a spark for those discussions about leaving?
So I think in terms of the process, going back to Article 50 and all these things that we've kind of largely forgotten about now, yeah, the actual process is straightforward, but it's the political machinations it causes in a country. I mean,
this country
has been through hell. Governments have fallen, prime ministers have fallen. The country has been terribly divided. I think if you were an EU nation looking in on that, you would say, well, okay, there is a process here, but the consequences go with that process. So yeah, I would have thought it would be off-putting rather than encouraging.
Encouraging, yeah. So, final point that we are going to discuss that you brought up, and obviously as you know, Gordon is in Scotland, is living in Edinburgh, the capital of Scotland. Will the United Kingdom stay united?
Yeah, certainly the calls for independence in the case of Scotland and reunification in the case of Northern Ireland have, these voices are stronger than they've ever been before. In some ways, taking Northern Ireland first, to avoid a border with Ireland for customs purposes, the UK has had to agree to effectively have a border in the Irish Sea. So the customs checks are done between Great Britain and goods going to and from Northern Ireland. It feels like a pretty artificial device. And so those who want United Ireland and want to then rejoin the EU on the back of that, their voices, I think, have been strengthened. And there is, under the Irish Good Friday Agreement, there is provision for a referendum to be held when, a majority, or appears to be a majority of people wish to achieve that. So the risk of Northern Ireland becoming part of Ireland and from a UK point of view, losing Northern Ireland has never been greater. And also to bear in mind that Northern Ireland did vote to remain in the EU. So as with Scotland, you know, they could say we've been taken out of the EU against our will. And the Scottish situation, yeah, I mean, over 60% voted to remain in the EU. It was a strong vote. There will be elections in Scotland in May. And if the Nationalist Party, who are currently in government, are returned to government, there will almost certainly be a referendum on leaving the UK within maybe 12 months of that. Very much on the basis of we want to return to the European Union. But of course, a huge debate about Scotland then being separated from its biggest trading partner, i.e. England. That's a huge debate to follow. But I feel it's probably as high as 50-50 that Scotland could end up as an independent country and rejoin the EU following this.
And would there be any political influence on whether or not Scotland's eligibility to rejoin the EU is in place? And do we know that? Because there's been a lot of speculation about that.
Yeah, I mean, before Brexit, there were various statements, particularly from Spain, which were very discouraging to those in favor of Scottish independence and trying to rejoin the EU as an independent country. But again, from the EU perspective, that's really changed now that the UK has pulled out of the EU. So the official line is that the EU won't get involved in domestic UK politics. But certainly privately, a number of political leaders in Europe have now made very positive statements about the prospect for Scotland rejoining. So yeah, that is a real issue, and again, that will be a hugely divisive issue in Scotland that comes up, I think, fairly shortly.
Fun. Gordon, thank you so much. We've come to the end of our time. If anybody has any questions, quickly pop them into the Q&A or into the chat box. But like I said before, if you go to the EuRA website and click on the events tab, you'll see the list of webinars that are coming up. We've got 2 on corporate housing and we've got 2 on immigration. One of the immigration ones is going to specifically look at Brexit and the impact. The second one is going to look at the impact on the Biden administration. And that was just something I wanted to bring up with you finally, Gordon. It's well known that, that Joe Biden is a great fan of Ireland and was very anti-Brexit. If there were moves for Northern Ireland and Ireland to reunify, would the UK's special relationship be in any way in jeopardy? No, I don't think so, because Biden's concern and the genuine American concern on this is an upsurge of violence in Ireland around nationalists being unhappy that a border is recreated in Ireland. So if it goes the other way, I mean, God forbid, but I mean, I guess it could trigger some unionist violence against United Ireland. But no, I think the American position would be that they would have no objection to a United Ireland, far from it. It would be in the...
It was the democratic will of a majority of the people of Northern Ireland. So yeah, I think that he would not be an obstacle, far from it.
Jenny Hogan, thank you for your question. Will we need a visa to go to a EuRA conference in future? I mean, probably not. We have looked into this in other areas. When we've gone to visit China, for example, to go to a conference, do you need a business visa or can you go in on the touristic visa? It really depends. But in 99% of cases, if you're going for a conference, you can go in on a tourist visa. But it's worth checking because, again, you don't want to be turned away at the airport. Thank you so much, Gordon, as ever. We will be returning to many a topic over the coming months, but certainly data And thank you again for your legal module, which is in the MIM Academy. That's free to certify. All the modules are free to certify until the end of January at least. We made them all free again. That's great, Gordon. That has certainly brought clarity for me. Like I said, 21st of January, impact of Brexit on immigration will be a specific session. That's live to sign up for now on the website. We'll be sending out all the details of those next week. Thank you to everybody. Thank you, Sylvia. Thank you, Adrian. Thank you, Alistair, for your kind comments. It's always great to bring everyone together. It's just a shame we can't now go off and have a coffee and a cake somewhere, but we will. In the meantime, Gordon, thank you so much for your expertise. Thank you to every beer. Yeah, not coffee. Forget that, Adrian. You're quite right. We'll see you all soon. Thank you to everybody for joining. And as I say, thank you, Irene. That's very kind. Thank you for joining the recording. I will get that edited and put it up to YouTube tomorrow. It'll be sent out to you all, and it will go to the rest of the members next week. So if you want to return to it or you want to use it as a training thing for your team, you're very welcome. In the meantime, Gordon, thank you so much. Great to see you as always. Thanks everybody for joining. Take care and goodbye.
Bye.
Bye.